1. Warning, the stream's current bitrate is low. That's not good. All right, I think we're actually live. So welcome to another weekly Unity GameDev live stream. I'm never going to stop workshopping that name. I'm here with Jason. Today we're going to, take your questions. If this is your first time here, welcome. We're just basically going to take your questions about game development, more specifically programming, and also more specifically Unity questions. So if you have those, come on in. If you'd like to know the difference between our opinion on Unreal versus Unity, that video has actually gotten a lot of views lately. I have one that we discussed it, getting kind of mixed reviews on it, but I think mostly...
Yeah, some people did not like my take, apparently.
Which I expected, it's like, anything versus anything is going to have people with a hot take on either side, so... Yeah, but we focus on we focus on Unity game development, and we are both game developers, as most of you probably already know, programmers. I mean, so just come on through and ask your questions, and then towards the end, we're gonna take a final look at the Oregon Trail code base that we've been looking at the past couple weeks. I was really having a lot of fun with it, so we're just gonna finish off and try to add a new feature, try to add some pause functionality. So yeah, it should be good. So drop your questions in the chat. And also, one last thing before I kick it off to Jason to let him say whatever he needs to say or wants to say. If you want to have your code reviewed, just drop it off at infalliblecode.com/code-review. There will be a link to that in the description. So what's up, Jason? Got anything going on?
Hey, you're putting me on the spot. I don't have anything particular to talk about yet.
I gave you like a minute or 30-second headway there.
I'm thinking it's hard to come up with something that,
I was getting tired of my own voice, so I was hoping you'd have something. Anything new in the... Oh, well, actually, what we can talk about is the new release of Unity, 2019.3, which is kind of funny.
Like, it caught me off guard, actually, because I'm so used to making custom inspectors for myself, and I hadn't really thought about it, and I was working on some scriptable object that's sort of it's basically a scriptable object representation of a 2D array. So I'm working on a little grid system, and I want to be able to read in text files that have characters representing stuff, and I'm loading it up. Long story short, I was going to make a really quick little renderer that would just show what the current state of the grid is. And I open up, editor folder, and I make a new custom inspector, and I go double click it, and I look for the usual on inspector GUI function, and I stop and go, no, did that yet. So I at the moment do not know how to make a custom inspector, and that's my new piece of homework for this evening, I think.
So have they completely switched over to the new UI elements?
Well, it is in at least the 2019 3 something. What am I on at the moment?
2019.3 is the latest.
Yeah, so at the moment, if you do a normal editor inspector thing that extends from the editor base, it uses the visual element object. So it's
interesting.
It looks way better. Like I'm certainly on board for it. It's just when you're so used to doing it the other way and have been for how many years, the first time you see it and go, oh yeah, I don't know how to do this yet. This is frustrating.
Yeah. Is that the XML, or rather, what is it, UML driven Unity markup language?
Yeah, it's a variant of XML, isn't it? It's XAML-ish, some kind of XAML sublanguage.
It's definitely a XAML-ish, but they named it something that's like Unity.
Yeah, use XAML, whatever. I don't know. That's the one. It looks like that.
Cool. I like that.
I do like the fact that it seems to be very object based, right? Like the other one was a sort of linear sequence of you physically drawing the inspector, but the new one is composing objects and components, and looks good. It looks like it narratively makes more sense to me in terms of composing the units of blocks of property drawers and stuff, but
yeah,
like I said, until I've actually learned how to do it properly, at the moment, it's just a thorn in my side. Gee
whiz, someone should make some tutorials on that.
I know, right? I know a guy. I'll ask him.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of high level like programming type videos, obviously, but I kind of want to cover some Unity things, some Unity specific features. I think I might get back into that, but this time around, like. Before I covered like things like the shader graph, and I tried to put a programming spin on it, but I think moving forward, I might cover things like where you really have to get into the code. Like the Unity netcode is one. Dots, really excited to look at the input system. Definitely, that one requires some setup there. And then
that's one I'm still mildly avoiding. From
yeah,
Because in the earlier days when they brought it out, there were so many issues with it and missing features and stuff that all
Yeah.
I can see is seas of people complaining about it. And I thought I'm not going to even invest my time. That I've It was one thing when I was using it as an experimental tool, right? When you're really learning thing, you have the luxury of going down the rabbit hole of entering beta plans and that kind of stuff. But when you need it for work,
Oh
it's
yeah.
just you can't take the risk. So I
Yeah.
haven't really done it, and I won't until stuff comes into or you know, version 1 status, I guess. Yes,
Eddie Burke here asked if we've tried the Unity network, the new Unity network system. I haven't. The networking system I haven't.
no.
You?
Well, again, it falls into that category, right? Like I haven't
Yeah.
been looking at this stuff until something is robust enough that I start seeing people use it and start seeing guides and tutorials being invested in how to do it properly. This stuff is too changeable to be mainstaying on, you
All
know.
right, all right. I get the hint, man. I'll do a tutorial.
Yeah, could you get round to it? God, I'm just waiting.
Oh man, yeah. That'll be the only reason I really look into any of these at this point in time, which is to make tutorials about them.
Hmm.
Dots is really cool. I'm really excited about it. So just because I've always uh, I've always liked the ECS architecture. You know, I don't know. Maybe it's like the 2020 version of MVC, where I try to shoehorn it into everything I do. But
Yeah.
maybe it'll have a renaissance, or it'll have, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
But I'm
for
excited.
me, it's like functional programming, right? It's one of those things where it's like, this is really cool and there's a lot of really fun stuff. I need to find a way to use it in everything I can.
Exactly. That's where
Yeah.
I'm at. Uh, Tapandra says, can we please get a complete mini game project tutorial where we implement good code practices? You
Mm.
know, I hate to say it. That's the kind of thing that I avoid as well, because you can't really cover that in one video. And honestly, series are really hard to maintain as a content creator, just because, you put out the first video, you get some interest, and if any subset of your audience, I'm getting a little meta about being a YouTuber, but if any subset of your audience is like, I'm not really interested in this, while you might be very interested in watching this whole mini game project, and maybe even, 80% of my audience cares, eventually when I get to video 2, 3, 4, part 5, there's just so little return on interest of going to the trouble of making the whole video that it never really tends to be valuable, and really doesn't tend to be valuable for even you guys. I've
Yeah.
noticed, yeah,
That's what I was gonna say is even from that perspective, even from an
yeah.
educational perspective, um, if you give someone a full project like that, you tend to get two audiences, right? You get the ones who will follow along with you,
Hmm.
and there's a bad habit of just copying the code and not really paying attention to what's happening.
Yeah.
And the second half is you'll get the audience who will look at it like they're watching a TV show. They're looking for the conclusion. They're watching the story. They're not actually involved in what's going on. So I'm usually against the idea too. That being said, I like watching them when I see them on YouTube myself, but I have to be honest with myself, I don't engage with them as much.
Yeah.
When I see a single video that covers the topic, I'm inclined to watch the topic, learn about it, and then go off on my own research about it and decide how relevant it is to add it to my project. It's just not really worth the engagement. And I also find it's very hard to teach that correctly because there's a lot of stuff that comes into play. When you
Mhm.
pick a single topic, you can decide how to attack it and what angles you're at. But sometimes some of the refactorings you'll do in the course of a project, they're kind of come from experience, or I will, pre-create some objects that I know will come up later, or something that I'm relevant to that doesn't follow the exact structure that would kind of make narrative sense if I was explaining what I was doing.
Mhm.
And that can be a real difficult situation when trying to build a tutorial. You're trying to say to somebody, I'm trying to explain as I go, every step, why I'm doing it. But there hits a point where it's because I did this kind of thing 3 years ago and we got to this point and I learned a valuable lesson, I'm putting this in place, take it for granted, we'll come back to it later. That stuff doesn't really fly, right? It confuses people. It's hard to kind of parse, and it's just not very helpful. So the unfortunate truth is you're just not going to find much of it. You're not going to find many people engaging with a full start to finish project. You're far
Yeah.
more likely to see single topic kind of videos. If you want that kind of stuff, I'm guessing even Pluralsight don't do it. Like I don't really know of anywhere where you're going to find full projects from start to finish. That doesn't really happen that often.
Yeah, but you make a good point about Pluralsight. Like, if you that's probably where I would do it in the context of a course, is where I
Mm.
would actually say, all right, we're gonna go from start to finish. And also, one thing you mentioned too is, like, any topic you cover, you choose from which lens or context you'd like to attack it. For instance, this weekend I've got a video coming out on the Singleton pattern, and a lot of people have spoken about the Singleton pattern. So what do I have to offer that's any different or new? And so I had to really consider that when I went into, scripting it and making the video. I had to figure out, what is this new thing I can say about it? What's a different approach that I can take? And I feel like I did that, but it took some thinking. And the same thing is with a project. If I were to do a full project, I'd probably, use it as a springboard to teach, Scrum or how to work on a team. And you wouldn't really see me doing a lot of coding per se. You just see me talking about how am I going to make the functional specifications, how am I going to make dev tickets, how am I going to do, I might teach you about stand-ups and how to work with a team and get communication going and those sorts of things. So it's not outside of the realm of reason, but yeah, it'd probably be in a course. And it literally, the whole project would probably be over the series of a couple courses. I think Bob Martin probably does that. He'll do like one project over the series of a couple different.
Well, he does sort of play-by-play things. Him and his son do a lot of videos where they will create a small project together. Like they literally rewrote their own website and then went through a video series explaining the design decisions and that kind of thing. But yeah, again, I would say counter that point as well. The opposite is true, in the same boat. I really hate seeing videos on design patterns where they're simply like almost reading the documentation for it, describing it as just the thing, just like, here is the thing, go and use it. It has to be couched in a practical example. Well, you're probably not going to see full-on start to finish-ish projects. I think a lot of people, myself included, do aim to at least create a small practical example of a use case you would have and implement it inside of it. And that at least gives you the grounding of, this is sort of how you'd use it. The question is, how do you scale it as it gets bigger? That's an experience thing. And it's very hard to explain architectural scaling in that way, right? We can kind of cover patterns and practices and ways to sort of mitigate issues and draw correct boundary lines. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to just experience it to know what to do. And doing a full project, you're kind of almost not going to learn what you intend to, because what are you looking for? Are you trying to learn the physical lines of code that are written? Are you trying to learn how to how to answer certain problems? Well, if you do, are you actually learning it, or are you just came to the conclusion of what they will problem? And all of this stuff doesn't scale. It's not good for you to learn by watching other people, as weird as that sounds. So it's more a case of learning how something works, seeing an example of it, and then re-implementing it yourself. And then trying to find the intersection forces you to see a problem before you find the solution. If you just copy and paste what's there, you're going to find yourself losing a lot of nuance in why that stuff was built in the first place,
Yeah, with the Singleton video I got coming out, I didn't even cover how to implement it. I covered aspects of its implementation, but because the Singleton pattern, the pain points of the Singleton pattern are ones of the future, ones that you won't experience until way down the line as your project grows and scales. I had to figure out a way, and you'll see this, on Sunday. I had to figure out a way to convey that. So even in this video, I don't really I show code examples, but they're very much like, here's the code now, the day you wrote it, and here's what it's going to look like, and here's why it's going to be a pain in 2 weeks, when you have to refactor it or when you have to hand it off to someone else. So yeah, it's a challenge, definitely is. And so that was a long way to answer your question there. No, we're not going to do it. I'm not going to do a full project. Or if I do, it'll be in a course, and it won't be me coding it. It'll just be So yeah, let me take a moment, since I think we wrapped that question up. What did I say last time? Demonstrate your appreciation. Oh, that doesn't sound good. If you like this video, smash that like button. It's just way easier to say.
I was watching a Gus Johnson video recently, and I think he had something like essentially beat the like button or something.
That's what I was going
Fantastic
for.
answer, yeah.
Hey, Mert, dude, isn't it too late in your place now or early in the morning? It's super early, and I totally forgot to set my alarm because I had a late flight last night. Jason woke me up, so thank Jason for the stream. It's like it's 6:30 right now in my time, AM.
Yeah, and so this is me sort of making up for not making the last stream because I slept in. So we're even now.
maybe we'll wake up for the next one.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. Yeah, well, I just spent a lot of time talking about my next video. So if you haven't already, I wish there could be a way I could like do. I guess I could do a premiere, but I don't want to do that. Set your alarms for Sunday at noon. I'm really excited about this one. I think it'll provide some value. I probably shouldn't talk it up too much, just in case it sucks. But what are you gonna do? Too late. Cool. So,
I guess one thing that I'd be interested to talk about is, so in the interest of trying to cover more topics that get closer to real practical examples, this is actually something that has been firmly on my mind recently, because I would like to have done a large project kind of thing, but it's just not practical. And so I've been really trying to find a good solution. And for now, at least, I'm kind of thinking along the lines of trying to come up with little bottle ideas and project systems and components, I guess, is the right way to approach it. Because that's something that can be an almost complete idea in a small kind of solution. So I'm thinking going forward, there might be a few ideas that might be closer to what you're looking for. More accurately, like implementing certain kinds of systems and features, how to do rewinding type solutions, or how to do saving data or loading data or various other things. It's just, if I can come up with good small bottle examples, we might be able to get some sort of some good prototypes of that sort of stuff going. But yeah, I don't know. It's, if anyone has ideas, let me know. But it's surprisingly difficult to come up with something that hits that right niche, you know?
It is. And, you know, some folks on YouTube very successfully do videos like how to implement 2D movement, how to implement a mini map, how to implement an inventory. But for me, at least for my channel, I just don't think that's valuable, because it doesn't really teach any. It's sort of like the teach a man to give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach him how to fish, he's gonna be able to eat. I don't know. He's not gonna die.
Give a man a horse, he'll eat a fish. I know the one you're talking about. Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. I just woke up. Yeah, like I could teach you how to make a mini map, but it's just gonna be one implementation, and it's gonna take very specific things into account, which are, what is the state of my project right now? And the state of your project when you need to make a mini map might be completely different. Maybe a good concrete example of this would be if you looked at the logic behind the mini map in, say, something like Skyrim versus the mini map of something like even Breath of the Wild, which is pretty much the same kind of game. It just, you know, obviously one's graphically different or whatever. I'm sure the code looks way different because those developers had different considerations to make when they went to go implement that. So
also, this is one thing that kind of interests me about the topic too, is every time I try to come up with an example of a practical thing we could do, I keep getting hung up on the fact that whatever it is almost doesn't matter, right? Because if someone said minimap, like there's about 50 ways you can implement a minimap, and that's not really the thing that matters.
50 right? Very valid ways, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's the thing is you'll find, like, for example, am I trying to explain to you a line of code that I Googled and found the exact thing I need, or are we going over what is effectively a walking tour of the Unity features set and different, like, I don't know how valuable it is. Like, if we were doing
like
a dialogue
walking
system
tour, it's a great imagery.
Because if you're doing a dialogue system, for example, like one of the comments there is, how much of that's going to be, here's how Text Mesh Pro works, here's how you know, here's how you get components in Children and reference different, like, this is all stuff that isn't really there's nothing special about teaching that other than the fact that you Google it and find the algorithms, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that I hope is a unique selling point of trying to explain this stuff is to approach designing it in such a way that it scales and grows. And that's not, then it doesn't matter what you're covering as a topic. It matters more, can you cover it in a way that shows how resistant it is to architectural problems. So I'm kind of less interested in building a full game simply because of those reasons, right? Because I don't want it to be, you know, go on a detour that explains for a while how to properly use blocks and stuff with materials, or how do you access the animation system in Unity and set different parameters, and why you should use the hashing solution for the string to hash for the animator. Like, these are all nice little tips, but they're not, I don't want to say they're not educational, but they're kinds of things you can Google. They're find,
Stack Overflow questions, it seems.
They are, yeah. They're kind of stuff that has a solution. You can copy and paste it.
Or Unity answers, although who uses that?
Yeah, I think I've been there 3 times at least, so I've gotten some use.
I think every answer I found on there, I'm like, maybe I'll go look at Stack Overflow. Yeah, no, but you make a good point. I think if I were to do things like, yeah, like you said, there has to be some other. Everyone's done it, or not everyone, but a lot of YouTubers have done it, covering very specific things like, again, dialogue system or inventory. There are so many out there. I mean, even the Singleton pattern, when I was doing research, I found like 4 different YouTubers who were like, here's how you do the Singleton pattern in Unity. And every single implementation was different. So which one's the right one? I would say that none of them, and I'm not calling anyone out, those are valuable videos in their own right, but none of them said, well, here's why I made these decisions. It was just, this is what the pattern says you should do. So this is my implementation. And it was just a step by step. So I think if I were to go through and do a series of like specific features, I would have to frame the whole thing, put it in a playlist that is like wrapped up in I'm approaching this through the lens of maybe performance, or I'm approaching this through the lens of I'm being as agile and as flexible as possible. And in every one of those videos, I would be sure to let you know that we're developing this thing, but through this very specific lens. For instance, the optimization one, that's easy because it's just so, you have to make so many considerations when you're trying to optimize your code that sometimes you even have to make concessions and the prettiness and readability of your code. So that's where I would say, hey, look, we're going to do an inventory, but it's going to be like the fastest running inventory, like stupidly fast. We're going to take every consideration possible to cut down on garbage collection, resources, all that sort of thing. Not that I would do that because I'm not really a pro at optimization by any stretch of the imagination. But that's just an example, I think, of when I would start doing videos like, here's a dialogue system. It'd have to be through the lens of something.
Yeah, and even then too, like not only would it have to be through the lens of something, it would also have to be something where, I guess, you couch not just why you guys aren't set in stone. So an example is earlier on today, in fact, I was writing a code for like a board game, we'll say. So it's effectively board pieces and you're moving pieces along. And I was thinking, I have to handle this so there's sort of an implicit map of what tiles are walkable versus what tiles have certain effects on them or so on. And I had about 5 or 6 implementations in my head. I could do various kinds of, 2D arrays, or I could use something in the editor where I'm using, if for out of bounds, for example, I could use raycasts against collider boxes to say this is an invalid area, and I could sort of obfuscate regions that are not clickable or whatever. And I started thinking, okay, well, so I made a quick grid system, 2D array solution, worked fine. And then I'm like, how am I going to build this so a designer can edit it? And I kept thinking, right, so now I'll build some tool that has an editor kind of clicker that I can then raycast into the scene, paint tiles, and I can sort of build my own version of a tile map or something, but for sort of a top-down grid type solution. And I wrote the code and it worked, and I was kind of down the rabbit hole of doing that. And I stopped and went, you know what? For this project, I think reading a text file will do fine. So I took out a text file and I just wrote out 1, 1, 1, 1, C, whatever, and each character represents a certain thing.
Yeah.
And I would just read it in, parse it. But then I thought I don't want to be reading a text file at runtime. So I built a quick editor that would read the text file, dump it into an in-memory storage on a scriptable object. So now I have a cached scriptable object that represents that data from a text file. So now I can give the designer the text file and say, play with it what you like. And I've got a asset importer that will read it in and change it. I can then update the scriptable objects relative to the text files. Why did I go down that rabbit hole? Well, to kind of highlight the fact that my intention was to build something that is just effectively a grid of squares with some of them unpassable effectively. But I didn't know what solution I was going to pick for it. They're all pretty valid. I could have made custom editor tools. I could have painted them. I could have done some sort of external editor. I could have done, there's a million and one things I could have done. And I started with one, I changed my mind, and I picked one that was better for my need. And I like to program, which is how to evaluate the task you're doing and evaluate a practical solution for it. Not to say, I want to make an X, I will find a tutorial, I will follow it to the letter, and then that'll work for my needs. It's like, does it though? Is that just the first one you found that looks easy to copy the code from, or the first one that it seems to make logical sense to do what you're doing? Like maybe you could have done the same thing in half the time with a simpler solution if you were reasoning about it differently. So I don't like putting out kind of a direct single answer to something either, because people tend to think, oh, well, he must think that's the right answer for this problem. And it's like, no, I don't. That was the problem. That's the answer I picked this time for the solution for this thing I was doing. I may come across the same problem in 3 months' time and go a vastly different direction because I'm currently in the mood right now for custom inspectors. So I might be making custom, you know what I mean? Like it's completely different as to how I'll approach a problem.
Yeah. And that approach really informs the value of the video. Like if I were just saying, hey, I wanted to explore, custom editors, so I'm just implementing this thing in this way, not really very valuable as an educational tool. I mean, maybe a little bit, but if I were to say, I'm going to teach you how to optimize a Unity game for mobile, and to do that, I'm going to show you how to create a grid that, with that Jason just described, then I think that's more valuable, because then at least I'm showing you some specific implementation, but along the way, as long as I'm saying, well, I could do this, but in the name of optimization, I'm going to do this instead. And here's why, it looks ugly, but because of this, and that, I got to use regex or whatever the case may be. I think that's way more valuable. And, again, not to knock any YouTuber who goes or content creator or educator who makes just specific videos, like how to make a dialogue system, whatever.
Because at the end of the day, like we're talking about it from the luxury of knowing multiple different solutions to problems or being able to find them.
Yeah.
So it does help when they're out there. Like, I will, no matter what the problem is I'm solving, I will always Google it. I will always watch some YouTube videos, even if I think the YouTube video I'm watching is far beneath my current level of experience on the topic. I'll still watch it just to be curious to see what their solution is, because it might change my mind about the solution I was going to implement in the first place.
100%. And I think that's a challenge. When you're developing something, you do have to try to think into the future. You have to, and that's where you can kind of go down the rabbit hole of over engineering, because you're like, oh, what if I need to do this? What if I need to do that? And that, something that I've been focusing on, personally in my day job, is doing the upfront work of planning, just because that will inform so many decisions in the future. For I'm trying to think of a for instance, but right now I'm, for the company that I work for a very boring non-game industry company that does compliance and security software, really lame. However, I convinced my boss to allow me to create a VR demonstration, because we go to conferences and we have a big old booth, and it'd be cool to be able to slap an Oculus Quest on someone and let them see our product out in the field, because we deploy this product out into industrial scenarios. We can't really show you what that looks like, here in a pretty booth. So I was like, okay, we're going to make a VR experience. We're going to set the person on a construction site. There's going to be all this noise. They're going to have to go through and actually use our solution. So that's great, right? He was on board. So I started making a business specification, which is just a high level description of what it will do. And what is valuable about that is, as I was discussing it with my co-workers, we were thinking, oh, how are we going to put a movement system? Are we going to implement like VR chat style where you grab and pull this and that? We started going crazy. And I was like, you know what, guys? Honestly, there doesn't have to be a movement system. We just need to use, the Cinemachine to move the individual into position, give them interactivity so they can use our product. And then once they're finished using the product, we can move them to another part of the construction site. We don't have to do all this crazy stuff. And so if I hadn't just opened up my code editor with the idea of making this VR experience, I probably would have downloaded some VR movement pack, played around with it, wasted days, and only to be like, I actually don't want to let them move around, because I don't want to flesh out the entire, I'm not, and that informs another thing. I'm not going to flesh out an entire level. I'm only going to flesh out as much as I need to. And by using the Cinemachine, I'm keeping them on a specific track so I can kind of get away with that sort of cheat. And anyway, that's a small example just to say that upfront planning work and thinking ahead and trying to visualize the entire experience from the user from the perspective of the player, that allows you to I don't know, optimize your workflow, I guess, cut corners where you can. So upfront work, I'm really about it.
But cool guys don't look at feature explosions. Just remember that.
I love feature explosions.
Yeah. Eaten many months of my life. I think though, with that in mind though, I'm just to kind of play devil's advocate in the idea.
Yeah.
I'm also worried about the kind of counterpoint to that, which is I think so. The
You're gonna
problem
say what my
I
coworkers probably told me. Well, let's hear
well,
it.
it's more just a case of I find what worries me is I get a lot of very specific questions.
Mm,
How do I save my game to XML files?
mm,
And I end up going, but what's your real problem? And they're like, well, I have to save my game to XML files. Like, no. What are you actually doing? Well, I have to save my game. So stop. Everybody's that's your problem. That's what
yeah.
you're trying to do.
Yeah.
XML files is an arbitrary implementation detail. Now, this isn't to say go and build a super abstract Uber persistence layer separation, whatever. But it is worth just remembering that providing somewhere in your game it says persistence.save player, and you pass in the player, and you can say, right, I'll come back to that problem later. And the first version can be a flat file, the first version can be whatever, and then later on you can fix it. Like
Mhm.
unequivocally, every single time I build any system for any platform, whether it's a game, mobile app, PC game, or even an API, my first version of storage is a simple repository with a in-memory list. It is effectively a list file.
Mm.
I have a list of whatever items it is, and that is my in-memory storage. And then I build the rest of my game, or whatever the project is, and I keep adding stuff to it, and I don't really need to save out yet. And then at some point, I build some other thing that saves it to a text file or dumps the entire thing to a binary file or stores it in a DynamoDB database or a MySQL database. But I'll only add that when I need, first of all, I just need to be able to put stuff in a place. Step one. Step two, I need to get that stuff back when I stop and restart my app. So I do the next smallest version of that, which is usually it comes 90% of the time, and it's fine. I mean, it starts to get a bit annoying when you want to search and filter it. You have to actually load it all into memory and do messy stuff. But if the whole point is I need to persist my data, fine. I come along later, and now I have a list of entities in a game, and I want to sort through them and find stuff. Then I can say, hang on, this needs to be a database. If I'm going to be searching it, I'm going to do queries on it, fine. But so upfront planning is great because it lets you figure out where the boundary lines are.
Mhm.
But the goal should be I plan what it is that I want to do, my actual goals. I find out what the quickest or simplest implementation that will work for my task is. I will implement that, not the solution that will solve all problems ever. I will implement the thing I need. It just happens to conform to the contract that I've figured out is what I actually need, so that when I tell myself down the line I will switch this to Y, I can see where that plug socket I've left is. That's all that should really be. So I'm always very careful to, because again, programmers have that instinct, right? Like if I'm building a persistent system, my mind just goes, why don't I make the ultimate persistent system? Why don't I have
Of
the ability to
course.
save to 50 different formats? And well, of course, I'm going to need to use gzip because what if someone wants to send it to an API and there's going to be sending thousands of items? Now, obviously, that case only applies when I have thousands of items and I'm using a web API, but I'd better support it just in case that one scenario possibly. It's like it's nonsense. It's a big waste of everyone's time.
Oh yeah. Not to mention that, those decision points, they stack up, and at the end of the day, it might not even matter because all those decision points might overwhelm you, and you might just abandon the project if it's a personal thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love Bob Martin's example of this. He says that he was building this product, fitness, and the very first thing they wrote down on the board was, "Well, we'll need a database." That was the very first thing they wrote, like the very, very first thing they wrote. And they ended up deciding we don't need it right now, so let's just put an in-memory database there for now.
Yeah.
When it shipped, it didn't include the database. They didn't even write the database feature because they were using a proper form of sort of an agile / scrum methodology where they were using feature tickets that were most important, and they ordered by what the most business value feature is. And by the time they were nearly done to release, they were like, well, there's 4 or 5 things left in the pile, including add support for SQL as opposed to flat files.
Yeah.
And it's like, do any of our clients need this? Well, not right now, at least. They're all just using the app as it is. So they published it, and then they just let that go. And then about a year later, they added a plugin to support
Yeah.
the extra feature that one needed for or something. And it's like, that was the first thing that came to mind, and literally didn't even make the production build.
Oh man, that happens all the time. I mean, it really does, both in the business world and in games.
Mm.
I mean, think of how many games that are out there that feel so bloated, have features in it that are just like they don't provide really any value to the player at all as far as the improving the gaming experience. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but
To be honest, not even games. Like the one that still hurts is anybody who ever uses Photoshop these days. You know, like
oh my gosh, yeah.
I love Photoshop. It's a cool app with a lot of features, but I'm a plebeian Photoshop user. Like I am not building massive, amazing things with it. I'm not really doing hair, masking to do some really fancy compositing work. Normally, I'm just cutting out a bloody logo or something, or sticking something on a page, or I'm doing a mock-up of a web page or a mobile app, and I want to, I don't want to use XD for whatever reason.
I'm usually cutting you out of the background in Photoshop.
Yeah, there you go. So stuff like that.
That's
it's like I look at it and I go, yeah, thanks for putting that out there. It's just a million features. And
it's a million features. Yeah.
If there was an option to say run Photoshop in slimline mode where you tick the 4 features you want loaded, the app would run a million times faster. It'd be better for me personally. And I know there's other lightweight tools out there, but let's be real, Photoshop is a gold standard for a reason. It does a lot of amazing things. I want to use its features, just not all of its features all of the time. And I kind of feel like apps and games can get to that point, right? As you kind of lose track of both what the feature you were trying to do is, and even from a development standpoint, you forget what it is you're bloody making. Like, what is the thing? And this is why I always talk in terms of use cases. I think the most important thing you can do is write down, I open this to do Y. And if you remember that line and you find yourself in the middle of programming something and you pause and go, does this contribute to that? Oh, it doesn't. I'm completely on a tangent. And that's really easy to remind yourself that you're off the beaten track because the code you're writing doesn't fulfill the requirement you're actively working on. You're probably adding something that at least isn't relevant right now,
Yeah, for sure. And I talked about this, I forget when I talked about this, maybe a couple videos ago, but the concept of doodling, where you have an idea. For like, I did this recently. I want to make a point and click system and turn it into a package that I could grab and drop into any project, and I can make a point and click game. So that was my goal. That was my intention. First thing I did, open up Unity, open up the editor, and start typing code. Didn't even think about anything else. What did that lead to? Maybe a couple hours of work, roadblock, and a project that I haven't touched in weeks. So, it's completely invaluable. Completely. I mean, if there's any value I got out of that session, it was that I know I need to just, and I know this, but I need to go back and plan it and think about what it is I want my point and click system to do. But yeah, I didn't sit down at the computer that day with any real tangible goal or intention. I had this very broad goal of I want a point and click system that I can use in any project, but clearly I couldn't have knocked that out in one session, at least not in a way that was up to what I really needed, that would fill my actual needs. So the takeaway there is, and even I know I speak from experience from coming from like software development as a professional working in the an enterprise company. I always try to look at what's the value add to in my boring day job with the customer. What's the customer going to get out of this? Because I have to think about these things. But when you're talking about what you're making for in Unity or a game, what's this going to add to the player? And if it's just like Jason was talking about persistence, and I would totally do what he said. I would be like, write to a file? No, that's not good enough. I got to support everything. And even if I came to the conclusion that this provides no value add to the player, I would still feel crummy moving on from it because I just can't help it, But that's where you have to get past it,
I left out part of that story, which is I had the amusing thought that the basic version I had supported SQL for querying, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to see if I could also support NoSQL because it doesn't use the same SQL adapters? And so I was like, oh, this will be a fun little side experiment. I lost 3 hours on that project just deciding that I wanted to have DynamoDB support.
Yeah.
And I started looking at, I have to go into AWS and set stuff up and start configuring environments and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't need it, and it wasn't going to be used on this project. So I thought, this would be fun. I would like to be able to save it. No, just an absolute waste of time. So you have to cut yourself off at some point and go, this is a hobby. I'll write this note down, and I will continue this in my free time when it's not part of what I'm working on.
100%. Yeah. And it almost sound I could see myself watching this if I wasn't streaming, if I was just watching the stream. I could see myself looking at this and saying, "Come on, we're game developers. This is a hobby. This is an art form. Like, you're taking all the fun and joy out of it." But then on the other hand, I see all these motivational videos and posts. How do I finish my game? Here's how you finish your game. #finish it. The steps to finish your game. This is how you finish your game. You buckle down, you treat it seriously, you plan ahead, and you don't go off and doodle and explore things that aren't going to provide value to you or your players.
Yeah, and what's really weird is people do not realize they are in a permanent fight with themselves.
Oh yeah.
So for example, I want to make a game that's fun. Pretend that's the objective. You start making it and you're like, ooh, I could make this procedural. I could do these things to this. And then you're thinking, ooh, procedural's fun. I like procedural. I can go and make some cool systems that integrate and generate all of the environments and have the trees come through with various different things, and I could build multiple cities and stuff. And then you're like, hang on a second. Will making this part of my game procedural make my game better? Or do I just think procedural is cool? And that's completely a separate topic from making my game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You are actively fighting yourself because you as a programmer want to enjoy what you're working on. And sometimes the standard stuff is boring. Sometimes writing the grunt code is boring. And what's fun is building procedural systems or building cool animated solutions to menu systems or whatever. Or sometimes you feel really clever building a really robust localization system, but you're only going to release in America or Europe. And then after a while, you might support it down the line. You're wasting a month of your game time that could be developed on features that add to your actual goal, which is making a fun game. Yeah. And so try to remember that your instinct as a programmer will actively probably work against you from your instinct of making whatever it is you're making. So
yeah,
you can do that. You can go and make the fun thing, but then you're not making the game thing anymore. So take a priority, work on that one,
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, that's where you really have to answer the question, the hard question is, do you really want to make a game? Do you really want to be a game developer? Or do you just like mucking around with optimization? Do you really like coming up with systems? Because there are roles in companies that you could fill to do those things.
Developer is a majorly fun job if you like that kind of thing. Although again, you have the same problems. One of my most famous ones being, I was once working on a system which was it was an API for a banking solution. And what was funny to me is it really frustrated me when I saw that the testing solution they were using was a bunch of win forms. It was a bunch of forms.
Oh boy.
And they weren't just random win forms. They were new ones being made for every API call. They would literally make a window, drag a button, double click the button, write the code behind that would call the API and call a line of code. Now, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's fine. It works. And I totally get that. But I sat there and went, all of these are just a method call. You're calling a method, you're passing in the appropriate parameters, and it should just test that you get the resulted data back. Because it wasn't even like they were binding to Poco objects. They weren't even doing any kind of ADO.NET. It was just purely, does the JSON object that's returned look kind of like what I expect it to? It's effectively like what you would nowadays probably do by just running Postman collections or something. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I looked at this and I was like, well, this is not on. There's a better way to do this. But what did I do? My solution to, I just want to read an API call and see what it does. And I thought, what's better than just random forms? How about dynamically generated procedural forms based off of reflection of DLLs? So I went and spent like 3 weeks building a system where you drop a DLL in and it makes a list view of all of the method calls or sorted by namespace inside the API. You click one and it would procedurally generate a form where it would iterate the parameters, check the parameter types, build input boxes, have the input boxes cast to the correct types relative to the input fields, and then had an execute button.
You basically started creating Swagger.
Yeah.
Except in win forms.
And in win forms of all things. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, God.
Now it worked, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But you know who used it? Me. 3 times. That's all I ever used it for. And then after all of that, I begrudgingly looked back and went, all the other guys, like, they had the right idea. They spent 10 minutes on it. I spent 3 weeks, and that wasn't what
You both had the wrong idea.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
But yeah, that's not the point.
Well, I guess they had the right idea. They didn't approach it right. I'll put it that way. So yeah, just one of those things. It's so easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of making something fun for yourself.
Yeah.
and forgetting what your goal is. And that's really like, it's hard to do. I really do unironically recommend writing down on a piece of paper what it is you're working on. I don't even mean like a Trello board or whatever else. Write down, I am making a blank, whatever it is, and the goal of why you're doing it, and sticking it somewhere so that you'll catch your eyes from time to time and go, oh yeah, that's right. I was building a player controller. Why am I over here currently writing a persistence system? What was I doing again? Like, where did I lose that time?
Yeah, for sure. And if it's and if it really is comes down to you have an ultimate goal and you're just trying to get to that goal. Maybe you have a story you want to tell and you want to tell it through a game, or maybe you have a different take on an existing genre. To get there, you're going to need to get past those rabbit holes that you can fall into. And when you keep the ultimate goal in focus, but also the minute goals as well, like for instance, like a player controller. Why are you putting a player controller? Because I want the player to be able to move in the game. If that's the point. There's no other point to add a player controller. So if you start implementing your player controller and you think, oh, well, I should make it do that and this, you just got to remember right now, I'm just trying to let the player move around in the game. I'm not trying to support multiple controllers. I'm not just trying to support multiple players. At that moment, you need to focus on that one individual thing. Then the next step might be, okay, what if they want to do couch co-op? Okay, I'll support 2-player. Then you keep that in your vision. I'm trying to support 2 players, 2 controllers. Then you go in and you do that. But I think it's very easy to think that you have a good goal in mind, but it's too broad. And I think that for me is what leads to wasteful sessions. Is I have this really broad goal, and that just leads me in so many different directions. I find for myself when I really get down to the nitty gritty, and this is something that I do. This is why I write user stories. I don't know if you guys have heard of user stories. It's a Scrum thing, but the user stories, they really personally help me really focus in on what it is I'm doing in this particular session. So I'm trying to remember the format of a user story so I can say what it is. So a user story is something that you write to guide your work efforts, and it usually falls into the format as a blank. I want to do blank so I could do blank. So for instance, and you always frame it from the perspective of the person who's getting value out of what you're doing. So you might say, as a player, I want to use my keyboard to move around so that I can explore the world, right? Okay, so what does that lead me to do as a game developer? Well, I have to implement a player controller that takes keyboard input. That's it. Another user story might be, as a player, once you have that first work effort done and you're happy with it, you're moving around your game with your keyboard, you might say, as a player, I want to be able to use my Xbox controller to move around the player so I can, use my Xbox controller, whatever. So at that point, you're like, okay, cool. Now I know I got to implement multiple controllers. You go back to you open up your editor, you make a new commit, you do that part. And, it's very iterative. It's a very iterative process, and it can be a pain. My coworkers generally hate it. But, I mean, honestly, I have seen time and time again where it has not only focused myself and other developers and actually allowed us to produce results faster or move the bar forward faster in a project, but it actually allows you to produce work that fits everyone's expectations. Meaning, without stories like that, in my personal experience at my company, we've had developers produce work and it's done, but then when we all go look at it, we're like, oh wow, this is completely different than what I would have done. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you implemented it like that? Oh, that's way different. And that's because everyone approaches a task with their own background, with their own experience, with their own perspective. So when you really just focus in on what's the value you're going to provide for the person who's going to use what you're developing, to me, I feel like that is the ultimate approach to providing the most value. It sounded very business-like because I'm coming from a very business-like place, but
well, honestly, development product, which it is, like you can enjoy the process of making it, but realistically, the main goal should be enjoying the process of playing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, building is not meant to be the fun part. It's meant to be the work you have to do to end up with a product that's fun to play. And so sometimes you do have to realize, I will have to do this particular thing, and I have to put the work in to make that work, that exact thing, that feature I want.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely is a struggle. Like I really do find I've been consulting with a few teams, and sometimes I'll come in and I will see everybody really wants the project to succeed. You can genuinely see it. Everyone is enthusiastic about making the project succeed. But everybody is kind of working in a silo thinking, well, this will probably help the overall efforts to move in that direction. And I heard a fantastic quote recently that I think really sums it up. It's okay to get lost as long as you get lost in the general direction of where you're going. And I often find that that's usually the problem, is despite best efforts, everybody is vaguely thinking, well, stuff needs to be done eventually. This is the thing. It technically counts. I guess I'll work on this thing.
Yeah.
And if you were to write down a list of instructions of what to do, it's kind of like you can have such weird concepts of what you think is helping.
Yeah.
If you take a silly example of, we want to make a cup of tea, someone might say, well, tea, so we're going to need tea leaves. So I'm going to go see if I can find a good place that sells tea leaves. Now that may sound silly, but that's kind of what working on a big project is like. Someone is actively trying to help you engage with the process of making a cup of tea, but they're not working on something that's really helping you. Somebody else is like, water. Well, I guess I better build a well, right? We're going to need some water for this tea process we're making.
And I want the best water. We got to get purified water.
So all of a sudden you're like, look, we even if we do agree on the same task, which we don't always do, but even if we do write down on paper, we are all agreeing that the next job is this. You might be approaching it in nonsense ways, with completely irrelevant to what you're doing. And sometimes, and the worst thing is too, and this is a corporate culture thing. When you have a group of people working together, you will have them say something like, they've seen it done in other meetings, so they start to copy practical, patterns. And one of them is, everybody knows you should all work together as a group and ask yourselves, am I blocking you? Am I blocking you? Do you have been blocking issues? And it all sounds great. Right? Nobody, when someone says, am I stuck? They'll often say, I'm working on this thing. I'm going to work on, I'm going to add this thing. Yeah. I have nothing blocking me. I'll see you later. But then later on during the day, they'll be like, oh, hey, I'm going to go talk to this person later because I need them to help me with something. It's like, oh, so you were blocked by something that person could help you with. But it wasn't part of the culture of saying it that way. Yeah. And I kind of feel that I see this an awful lot with many teams that I'm working with, is that they kind of lose track of the goal, what they're actively working on. And I kind of think you need to just get everyone in a room and just say, we're making this, right? What is the next step every person sees that we have to do is? And you might get differences, you might get different opinion, but you'll get 2 or 3. You'll get, these are the next 3 things that move us the literal next steps towards the goal. If someone says well, shut it down and say, wait, okay, we don't need the well, but we need the water, right? Can we find a way to get water easier than a well? I have water in my sink. There we go. Let's use that. Probably not ideal, but we can start there. And then you got to work your way closer to the goal.
I really like this analogy, man. This is really good. It's so beautiful because you think cup of tea. Everyone's made a cup of tea. Everyone's got water. Well, I mean, hopefully everyone's got access to water.
Most people have water, yeah.
Hopefully you got a couple tea bags sitting in your cabinet. That's it. And then you have some mechanism to warm it up. But it's so funny because that is exactly like, programming something or creating something. It's like, you have all the tools right here, just pop onto the asset store, download a player controller. Why are you implementing your own player controller? Yep.
But I have a feature. I'm going to need to triple jump off that wall at some stage, and this one doesn't. Okay, well, how about we make a game that moves around and can press E to interact, and then we'll come back to the triple jump later on,
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You start, making a tea. You start with I gotta grow tea leaves. I know what kind of fertilizer am I going to use? I got to use the best fertilizer. I got to get a good fertilizer guy. I got to do research on that. And what am I going to use? Pesticides? Yep. What's the process? Should I use the ancient process of growing tea leaves, or should I use modern? Dude, just grab it out of the cabinet. Go, if you drink the tea and you're like, this tea isn't the best, you say, let's see if we can grow our own. And then you just grow.
And that's the thing too. Yeah, like even if that was the intent, and this is kind of a small tangent on a tangent, but you see this as well with business, right? You see people who have an idea for a business they want to do, and they kind of stop and go, well, I'll need the investment. I need to buy, like a very common kind of joke version of this is you get people who want to do web development or some kind of visual, and they won't start on resources to buy Photoshop, or they can do something else or 3D modeling or whatever. And they kind of sort of tell themselves, oh, well, I can't work on it because I don't have the tools that all the industry standard people do. Like, well, how about you just make a thing first. You just make a thing using anything that's free and just do it and prove that you can do it. And then you can migrate to the better tools when you have them. And even with small businesses, you get people who start buying asset investment, where they start buying up rooms full of computers and chairs and that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, what do you need to do this job? I've seen companies, in real life, I've seen startup companies go through the process of building an internal fulfillment process where they start having hiring and they start arranging for people to deal with, oh, well, we'll need people on the phones to talk to clients and we need people to do packaging and we'll need to organize all this stuff. And it's like, there's fulfillment services out there, right? We can it'll cost us more than internally, but we can do the job we want to do, have someone else do the fulfillment until such time as the cost outweigh the benefits, and then we'll look at building an internal office. And that's why
tax deductions, man. Tax deductions. That's why they buy all those office chairs. We got budgets we got to burn through. So they're going to take our money away. That's not besides the point.
Well, I mean, as someone who has a very good office chair for that, and for that reason, I can understand what you mean. There's no reason I needed to spend $2,000 on a chair. But
it's a write-off.
Yeah. But I guess the general point is simply that it's the whole losing the forest for the trees, If anyone hasn't heard that phrase before, it means you're looking at a tree going, where's the forest? Because you can't see it from your perspective, that you're currently focused too hard on the tree you're looking at. And it really just comes down to, you have to keep an eye on, is the steps you're doing really helping your goal, or does it sound like it? Is it the equivalent of building your well? And if so, can you, even if you decide you want a well, can you spin that off as a second project that's got a longer time to do it? Or can you hire someone else to do a quick well for you? And you can come back and do a real well later,
No, I don't know how we came down this tangent, but
we may have milked that tea metaphor for all it's worth, I think.
I like that one. That was a good conversation. It's something that's near and dear to my heart right now, because every day I deal with it at work, everyone's just trying to get to some end goal. We're just trying to push the product forward. We're just trying to develop new features. But we always get bogged down on the details, and it really does slow us down. And I think that's something that I've been pushing my team at work to just move past. Like put the upfront work in, try to figure out what we're trying to do, see the forest instead of getting bogged down on the tree. So good stuff. And we'll have an opportunity now to put our money where our mouth is, because I think it's time to jump into some code.
This will be interesting.
Sure.
Some stuff over here.
Yeah, sure will. Before we do that, smash that like button. Going to come up with a better phrase eventually, but until then, if you're enjoying the video, please hit like. Would really appreciate it.
We're going to find a programmer version. If anyone has a good idea for a programmery or game-related version of pressing the like button, give us a new
you tread the line of sounding really corny, though. But yeah, hit the like button if you can. All right, so let me pop on over to the code here. So we're taking a final look at the Oregon Trail code provided by Sean. I've really enjoyed working on this project, and today we're just gonna put in one final look at it, and again, I want to try to put our money where our mouth is. My cat is meowing at me right now. What's wrong, buddy? All right, so let's see what it looks like. So just gonna hit play, just take a high level look at it, what we have, because honestly, we can kind of pretend that we're either new developers on this project, or maybe it's been a while since we've looked at it, and we should be able to look at this project without being too concerned, especially if you're doing it live. So when you select one of these levels, let me go back actually. Looks like we have the ability to select a level, choose a level. Beautiful. There's some settings here. Nice. Show statistics. I probably don't want to show my statistics because I'm a terrible shot, but let's select a level. Shoot some animals. Oh, darn.
And by the way, I can verify that. I've tried to teach him Overwatch numerous occasions.
Garbage.
It's not working.
I'm absolute garbage. Let's see. I hope my shooting is better in VR. I have an Oculus headset on the way, so. All right.
We'll have a challenge then. Also, at some stage, by the way, we have to set up a Star Trek bridge crew.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm 100%.
So much fun.
Yeah. Maybe we can do these live streams in VR. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it. We got a level. We can kill some animals. There's a Doom level where we get a machine gun. That's pretty cool. Today, I'd like to add an enhancement to this. I like to add a pause button, or forget I want to add. Let's say we got this far in the process and we let some people play it took it to a couple of meetups or something. Everyone's like, I love this game. This is amazing. It's almost as if it's existed in the past. But I want to be able to pause. Maybe someone's like, I've got a really good, I've killed every animal I've shot. My accuracy is at 100%, but I have to use the restroom. I want to be able to pause. So that's what we're going to try to add today. So we're just going to assume, since it's going to be pretty boring for me to show you editing the UI and all that, we're going to assume that there's going to be a pause button right here. And we need to figure out what that looks like in the code. Okay. So I have some ideas of how to start. I don't know if you want to weigh in or if you just want to let me roll through, Jason.
You can go through. I'll just be here silently judging.
All right, please do that. So I think we have a concept of a game manager. All right, manages the game. I think that sounds like a safe place to put pause functionality. Don't judge me. I'm looking at you every time I make a decision. I'm looking to see what you got to say. All right, so let's pop into the game manager. All right, so we can see the game manager. If we were to look at the structure, it's that's probably too small for you guys to see here, but looks like we actually already have a pause and a restart, but we have a pause function here. It's public. It's not being used by anyone or anything, as we can see here. No asset usages. But I reckon if we put a pause button in the scene, it actually is being used by the end button. That's interesting. Okay, so but we have a pause function. So I imagine that with a pause function, we're probably going to want to add a resume function. So I think it's nice to figure out what our, I guess, contract will be to start out. I want to be able to call pause and resume. I think that sounds fair. Now, if we look at some of the other aspects of the game manager, actually, why don't we roll up to its dependencies? We can see it's got access to this world, but that's just a game object. So I can't imagine it having any specific functionality other than maybe setting it to an is enabled equals true, or what is it? Is enabled, or I forgot what it's is active. Is active is true. But then we have
wasn't it active self? I forgot.
Set active.
They changed it at one stage.
Yeah, I think it's set active, or I don't know. It's basically I see that this isn't a strongly typed class.
Yeah.
So there's I can assume there's probably no special functionality that I need to pause on the world. He probably just has a reference to it here because he's setting it active or something like that. Yeah. Or maybe he's going deep into the, like we've seen with the law of Demeter, he's going deep into the children and whatever. All right, so next I see we've got a current level and it's being used 8 times. And that actually is a strongly typed class. So maybe there's something in there that I'll need to pause. Scrolling down, we've got an is game paused. And so we see there's some interesting functionality here. And again, this is like what we were talking about earlier. I look at this and I think, I don't know that this is the best way to handle pausing by setting the time.delta or the time scale to 0. Maybe it is. Maybe someone who's an expert at Unity would say, yeah, that's how you do it. But in this case, it triggers something in me, but I'm not going to pursue that because that's not what I'm here for. I'm just here to see how to pause the game. And I should also mention, I didn't mention this. When I say pause, I mean when I am in a level and I hit pause, I should not see any more animals being spawned. That for the sake of this right now, and I should not be able to shoot, right? So that's what I mean by pause. Now, obviously, you'll have other aspects, like maybe the UI will gray out. Maybe a dialog box will pop up and allow me to quit or hit resume. Maybe I won't be able to see my cursor as a bullseye. But for the sake of the functionality that we're trying to give to the player, we're trying to stop spawning and stop shooting and not allow anything we do to affect our accuracy, right?
Yeah, pausing game state is a valid distinction between the pause user interface and pause menus and stuff.
Exactly.
Especially because without going down a whole rabbit hole that sort of alludes to what Charles was saying earlier, when you start getting into time scale pausing, you're going to end up with issues with unscaled time versus scaled time when it comes to different menu items and stuff like particle systems and UI animations not working and all sorts of other crazy stuff. So yeah, let's just focus on the fact that if the game state pauses, it allows a player to go to the bathroom, which I guess is the objective.
Yeah, that's the value.
Nicolas needs to go to the bathroom. So that's the use case for something.
We're gonna let that's the user story. As a player, I want to pause the game so I can hit the head. All right. So if we look at what we've got here in the pause method, we can see that it sets the time scale to 0. Okay. So I think from what I understand in Unity, that will stop updates from being called. So technically that potentially, how does time scale work again?
Time scale means delta will be set to 0. So anything that multiplies by delta will cease to act. So if you that's why you use delta as your multiplier, because it makes it frame independent, and then that means that anything multiplied by it. So if there are no values passed in via an update, anything that moves or should interact or should calculate should all be zeroed out, and it should effectively be as if nothing has happened.
Got it. Okay. So now the next question is, does anything use delta? So let's pop into the level here.
And the caveat again of the reference to that as a side note: if you've paused, if you've set it to pause, there's the scale delta time too that's different from unscaled, so you can still access what time would be had it not been scaled separately from the pausing with this.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, so seeing that level is the only thing here that the game manager seems to queue up or do anything with, we can see here that in select level, it calls level.begin and sets the current level. I think level is a good place to see if there's any other functionality that we need to pause, because I don't see any other functionality that needs to be technically paused in this. So I might roll down here. We see the begin sets some things to true. We've got ground spawners. We've got spawners. We got a gun. Okay, we got spawners, and that's what we mentioned. We want to stop spawning. So right now, what I see is that the spawners are actual just game objects. So I think the first things first is we need to figure out, is there a strongly typed spawner class? I imagine there must be, because something is spawning these things and it ain't happening in level or game manager. And if so, can we, since the level references that, should we make this a strongly typed reference to spawner and then expose some sort of pause functionality on the spawner and the level to let that bubble up? So let's take a look. Is there anything in this? Okay, so we have a spawner class here. Let me take a look at what we got. And another way I could have done that is I may have gone in here and tried to find the spawners. Maybe I'd type in spawner. Okay, so we got spawners here. Again, sure enough, there it is. We got the spawner script here in the editor, time to spawn, spawn rate, dynamic scaling, I guess a list of animals. So, all right, so beautiful. We got a spawner here. Let's see what it does. Okay, we already saw its dependencies here via the editor. They're all serialized fields, so that's kind of nice. And then we can see on start, it does an invoke repeating. So I can see already that this is how spawning is happening. If you guys don't know what invoke repeating is, it literally takes in a string as a. It probably takes in. You could probably pass in the method itself. I'm not sure.
But personally, I like using name of and spawn as opposed to the raw string, but same thing.
Same thing, yeah. So you pass in the name of the method. You pass in a first int, or is that a float?
Actually, you might as well do it while you're here. What's they say about always leave code better than when you left it or something?
What? Oh, okay.
Instead of spawn, just use the name of keyword. Yeah, it makes me feel better. I don't like magic strings.
Okay. Yeah, definitely don't like magic strings. So, all right, so it does invoke repeating, and then we can see what does it do. It's doing spawn. This is the time it waits to do the first invocation, and then after that, it's going to invocate the spawn. It's going to invoke, I guess I should say. It's going to invoke spawn. It's going to run spawn, however you want to say that. Execute spawn at a rate that matches this spawn rate float, which is set in the editor. All right, so what I'm seeing here is I'm not seeing any way to actually pause, because I don't see any reference to delta time. It just sets this guy up and runs. So invoke repeating, I don't know if this gets affected by...
I actually don't know either.
Yeah.
I don't think it would.
Well, there's, I guess one way we can... I guess I could look at the documentation. Well, what would I do in a real life scenario here? I'd probably look at the documentation, to be honest with you. So why don't we just try to keep it above board? I'm going to pull that into the screen. Give me a second. Invoke repeating Unity. So here we have the scripting API. All right. This does not work if you set time scale to 0.
Good to know. There we go. Lesson learned today.
Heck. Well, that
everybody learns something.
Yeah. Well, Well, that pretty much throws out anything I was gonna do. I spent a lot of time ripping. I did a little work ahead of time, and I did some work actually ripping out this invoke repeating method. And
I guess you moved it to a coroutine or something.
No, heck no. I just I did the whole math in the update method.
Right.
But now I don't have to do that. That's actually really elegant. I didn't like this. I'm not gonna lie. I looked at this and
now I will put a little asterisk here because I probably felt the same as you. Invoke repeating feels like running a coroutine by a string, and so there's that icky feeling of this doesn't seem right because it feels like a reflective thing that sort of must be worse.
Yeah.
Apparently, if profiled, invoke repeating is faster than coroutines.
Wow.
So from I guess I haven't gone through it myself, but I have heard that it is now in certain cases a better solution than a coroutine. So I'm less sort of reticent to use it than I used to be. So now I'm actually thinking when I need a quick timer, rather than spinning up a coroutine, creating a bunch of variables in memory, managing my own iterative timer, and adding delta time to it, it's like maybe I'll just invoke repeating next time. It just makes my life a lot easier.
Well, I guess the only refactor I need to make is time.timescale. How do I set it back to? Oh, it's just 1, right?
Yeah, just 1. And because 1 is being used as the explicit number in the is paused, it needs to be 1.
Holy moly, man. Well, that's what do you got? You got anything? Well, I guess I have some thoughts,
Well, the one thing I would say is that, again, I don't want to do it because we literally went on a big rampage about how it's not relevant right now. But the way I would approach it just as a thing going forward, time is one of those things where what you want to do with it will change drastically throughout the course of a project. So it's one thing to just have a general time solution, and this works for this kind of a project. But what I would most likely do is I would treat that as a strategy, which is this is a sort of simple solution for solving this problem. But as I scale up the project, I almost always like to have a time manager because I like a consolidated place where I try to set the time. Because for whatever rules, I might want to have limits when timescale can or cannot be set. And also, I might want to change what constitutes default timescale or have something that pauses but does different kinds of things. And because in effect, time delta time is a singleton, we are actively engaging with a singleton object, we are hard locked to using Unity's time implementation. If you have your own time service, you can still use time and have to pick your own singleton. Doesn't matter as long as you have a place where you can then interrupt and sort of add a property around the delta time and set your own things to it,
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
I don't know if we need it, but I'm just saying if you get to a point down the line and you decide, oh, we're going to add a new feature which supports slowing time, or maybe we're going to have just at the very end of a game, where like the time runs out and everything goes in slow motion, I want to make sure that doesn't have negative effects on the rest of my app. So it may seem like outlandish to say, well, I'm not going to add time control to my game, so why would I make a time manager? Well, you'd be amazed how much at the polish stage, when you start looking at adding juice, adding like localized sets of time slows or kind of speeds up at the end of something can be a really interesting bit of visual feedback to a person. And sometimes you might want to add that without it having drastic negative side effects on the rest of your game. So just wrapping it once, putting a thing on it, and just saying, this is where all time goes, means you can make those decisions later. If you don't, you can't make those decisions later, and you have to go and rewrite everything which uses time dot something somewhere in your code.
Yeah. So Tron made an interesting point, and I want to mention what I feel about this invoke repeating. He says that I guess in Unity 4 and Unity 5, if you set the time scale to 0, sound stopped working. Now, I don't know if that's true. I guess we can test it pretty simply by putting some audio on. But that I feel like I don't like this for something like a spawner. I feel like it's very
time is too powerful, right? Time is one of those things. Oh, you mean specifically invoke repeating, right?
Yeah, invoke repeating, and then like depending on time for all of this, I don't feel like it gives you any control. It doesn't give you granular control if you wanted to pause one thing and not the other. And I almost feel like an invoke repeating, this feels like it would be some sort of job running in the background, some very high level thing that would run. It just feels kind of it feels like a lot of magic happening for something that's like a spawner, which is like a fundamental part of your game. I don't know, that might not be coming across right. And this is what we talked about earlier, like trying to like, do I scratch this itch or do I just let it be what it is?
Yeah. Well, the analog in sort of enterprise software is threads, right?
Mm.
And you can do a thread where you can fire a thread and just as it's doing works, or you can pass in things like cancellation tokens and manage the lifecycle of your threads. You can control it when you need to, and that's kind of what this feels like to me, right? Like right now, we're sort of limited to all we can do is sort of control the spawning at a very sort of vague level where we can say stop spawning more stuff or run out the clock or whatever. But I personally like having a Boolean flag where I can just say, pause the calculations that you are doing that constitute spawning. And then you can sort of toggle that, and it's sort of like a localized pause, because there's plenty of reasons why you might want to pause that don't constitute pausing the entire application.
Yeah. Okay, so for the sake of just hammering out some code and having a reason to turn this into, because I definitely want to turn this into, I want to convert these into actual strongly typed fields reference or object references.
As a side note, how to build games made a point that is that's my experience with audio sources. It's one of those things when Tron was talking about it pausing or going weird with the audio going to 0. I assume he means an actual bug where the audio sources stop or something, because that is a feature, not a bug, unironically, where it's meant to slow down, right? If you're slowing down time, it's supposed to be dilating your audio and stuff as well. So that is a feature. It's just if you set it to 0, then theoretically your audio stops. And that's why if you use something like Master Audio, and you can actually look at their code and see how they do it, they basically allow you to run audio sources not using the scaling from time. So you can run things, but you have to explicitly say, play this sound, but don't use time scaling, that kind of thing.
Okay, that's good. All right, so we have a solution there. So, I mean, honestly, I would say there's really no reason to change this. I mean, yeah, I want to. I want to put this in an update method. But
yeah, there's tons of things that we could do on this, but I'd be cautious about going down too many rabbit holes.
100%.
Like the one that comes to my mind is right now it's a spawner where it's always using this pooling system and it's intrinsically tied. But in my mind, that pool is a strategy with which the spawner uses to acquire objects. I would probably wrap out some sort of external thing that gets me the actual objects themselves, so I can feed in different spawning solutions. So this one happens to be a pooling system, but it might be a different one or whatever,
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's take a look at it.
Again,
I don't know. No, go ahead.
Or even it's randomizing very explicitly, get a random position from these ranges and that kind of stuff. Maybe there should be some, randomizing function that you can choose weighted randomizers or whatever. Like, those are features you could add, but it'll be very difficult with this setup because everything is intrinsically connected to the one concept,
Yeah, for sure. Well,
and again, like it's running at start as well. It's the other one. Start runs every time the script starts. What if you want a delayed invoke on objects? Right now, there's no way to start the thing, have it wait a few seconds, show a few menu items, and then start when they press go. Everything intrinsically starts the minute this spawner starts. It would be nice to have a begin spawning function. These kinds of little quality of life touches would be nice. Keeps you more control over how the script runs.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about this? Just because I would be remiss if I didn't change something. Just to put our money where our mouth is, we've done it. Let's say I added a resume method that was valuable. We didn't have that before, and we need that to provide this, to let the player go use the restroom. Now there's a resume method. Now we can come through with a UI that has a resume button on it. If the audio is an issue, we can just set that audio up to play outside of the time scale if it's music, for instance. Otherwise, it's not an issue. This is good. This is perfect. This is exactly something that I would have wanted to completely rip up, but there's really no need to. And if I want to hashtag finish it, I have to just move on. Sorry, man. I have to move on from this.
That's worse than smash the like button. Gosh.
Look at this. I mean, I think we only added what, 6 lines to this project, and I think we did a very valuable lesson. Even for me, this was very valuable to articulate this in this way and see it and just say, hey, I got to move on.
I guess the one thing that I would point out is going forward with this is just, it's really, I have a constant frustration where I try to preach not to do the things I'm saying, because the things I'm saying come from a place of having done this a few times, and there's stuff that I would do myself from experience of scaling it. But it's kind of like teaching design patterns to people, is that I know when to use them, but I also know, more importantly, when not to use them. So I'm always very careful to suggest people apply a design pattern, because a lot of times people will just apply it because they kind of intrinsically tie two concepts together. I am creating things, therefore I need factory. That's not how it works. And so I'm just saying, looking at this, think of it more of a personal challenge, more so than an edict of what to do. But just look through this project and kind of see how many responsibilities each thing has. And each responsibility, even if you don't say it, is a collaborator.
Yeah.
Right now, manager is well aware that there exists, but also how it works. It's well aware that there's a pooling system in place, and it knows how that works and how to use it. It's well aware that there's a time system in place, and it knows where it is, how to use it, and how it functions. And all of these different things don't really belong to it. In theory, the game manager should be able to say, pause, whatever that means. Oh, you need to resume again? Resume again, please. And it shouldn't know how it's doing that job. Its job is to marshal that request and make it function. And similarly with the spawner should say, get me a thing. Where do I have to put it? Over there. Do the values have to be random? Sure. Randomize them somehow. These are 3 separate requirements that you can change depending on the scale or the way the project grows.
Yeah.
Right now, though, the spawner alone understands about 3 or 4 different concepts.
Yeah.
And these things are all collaborators. And I'm not recommending going and just randomly creating interfaces everywhere just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, if you intend to grow this project in any direction, ask what it would be and ask how you would change it. Like, would you want different spawn rates? Would you have a gameplay feature with the scaling, where the creatures are at different rates of spawning, or different types of creatures depending on what level you're at, or different kinds of things? Some will take more shots, or however you want to apply that. So maybe you can look at what the spawner is doing and say, does that know too much information about what it's doing? And similarly with time, is time something you want to handle separately? Do you want to have animated menus? Do you want to have sound playing while the game is paused, or these kinds of things? And can you figure out, you don't have to solve each problem. It's kind of like we talked about with persistence. You don't have to write every solution that you want. You just have to put a boundary line in place so that when you come to that problem later, you don't have to go Control F and find every time dot and replace every single one of them with go to my time manager because I might want to change this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's it for the code review today. I don't know. This was pretty valuable. I'm not sure what else we can do. I could come up with another scenario. What do you think? Yeah, it's
require adding features, and I'm sort of worried about going down too much of a rabbit hole adding random.
I 100% agree.
Like I think most people looking at this would say this is a red flag to me around 23.
Oh, hold on,
all of this stuff is just the general the law of Demeter stuff here is insane. 25 especially, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I believe this is doing is it's actually
activating all the children objects, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's activating the first level, the first location.
Yeah.
So we have this list of locations. So I mean, all right, for the sake of doing something here, I could get rid of this mess.
Well, when we moved it out of the game manager, at least. So if you remember when we first looked at this, all of this code was inside the game manager, which meant the game manager not only understood that levels existed, but understood what each single level hierarchy was. This at least removes it out to the point where the game manager just asks levels to do work, and the levels do their own work. But it's still got the problem now where this particular level, everything is done in explicit child order, and if you move the hierarchy around, you can't do anything with this, or things will break.
Yes.
So it would be nice if there was just a way of, like, as weird as it sounds, even just having an array of objects you iterate through and turn on gives you that freedom without having to worry about manually doing orders of children or something. It's still not good, but it moves you in that direction, you know?
Yeah. So basically, we let's just do that. Thanks, Daniel, for the super chat there. Scriptable object singletons ?
They're 2 separate concepts. Could work well together. I'm not sure what the question is really.
Yeah, I mean, they're 2 separate concepts. I guess that's valuable to expand on. Let's just answer that real quick, and I'll hop back into the code.
Yeah. So scriptable object is persistence in the case of in the editor to the point where you can store information. And a singleton is a single point of access. So theoretically, if you have something that there needs to be guaranteed one of, and you want to edit it you want to be able to edit it at editor time before you make the build, it can be easier than trying to go around and find different variants. I can see why it'd be valuable. I personally prefer to have if I have a singleton, I prefer to have a scriptable object, a variable on the singleton that represents the current data for it, and I can then change out the configuration on the singleton without it being the singleton. That means I could make like 4 or 5 preset scriptable objects for different configurations and then drop them into the singleton, and the singleton picks one for whatever reason. And that way, it is single, but it also allows me to have different varying setups.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I've done that sometimes, but it's basically for if you're doing a physics test, for example, or prototype a flocking simulation. A flocking simulation, if you go down that road, is using behavior systems, and you start working with desired velocities and so on. And once you start stacking the behaviors, they're all individual behaviors that stack together to make a more complex one. So basically, you're looking at cohesion, separation. You want to have arrival and various different behaviors. And so every one of those has weights and properties and number of objects to take into account and turn rates and speeds and all these different things. And they're kind of littered throughout every single entity. And so if you're making a quick editor where you want to have a menu item on screen that lets you tweak all of these values to see how the flocking simulation changes, it's very easy to have a different configuration of these settings dropped into some singleton, which can then be used by every single flock member and then also be used by the UI to render it. And that way you can save out presets of different ones that constitute, this is high cohesive, this is, more of a fish-like showl solution or whatever, and these kinds of different ones. So yeah, it has a use. There's certain value to it, but keep in mind they're 2 different things, right? One of them is about persistence, one of them is about maintaining single state of an object. So you can use them both together, but always favor composition over inheritance. You don't need to have one thing be the other thing. You can have one thing use the other thing. And that's almost always a better answer.
Yeah, definitely a good rule of thumb. I have a video about singletons coming out on Sunday, so if you're interested in learning more about that, definitely check that out. Daniel dropped another super chat. How much for a person code review? By the way, I'm imagining you mean like in-person code review, like a personal?
No, review. How their hair looks. Review.
A person code review.
Yeah, a person code.
Oh no! I'm not gonna do that. You can
dress code, hair code, all the usual.
You can review my bedhead today if you want, but I don't want to review anyone's person. Y'all look beautiful. Singleton only for global access. Just reading what he's saying there. Yeah, I'll have to explore that scriptable object singleton to see. That's definitely not something I touched in my video at all. Just talking about, I think he did mean personal, like personal code review through Skype or something.
Yeah.
What's funny? You mentioned that.
I was joking, by the way.
I don't know, man. I can never tell with you, man. Your Irish sense of humor.
Imagine if I was drunk.
You're not. Just kidding. I actually have something I've been working on to do, like peer-to-peer, one-on-one reviews with you guys. So keep an eye out for that. I'm not ready to drop a link to that just yet, but if you want to DM me on Twitter or on Discord, just hit me up if you're interested, and I'll send you guys a link and I'll talk to you more about that. But I will be announcing something like that in the future, how to do one-on-one reviews outside of the live stream format. And also, I've been also wanting to do dive into these code reviews a little deeper in bonus material for Patreon, just because there's a lot of things like we wanted to get into some things here on the live stream, but it would just be a rabbit hole. And I feel like, it'd be a better format to just drop it for those who want to see it, a much longer formatted video where we're just kind of free forming, looking at the code, and it doesn't have to be so produced like we do here on the stream.
Yeah, like there's a lot of design pattern stuff I would love to just demonstrate in kind of small bursts. Like go through a really quick example of how to use a repository with a scriptable object so that you can have shops in a game that persist as you work on stuff, or how you'd use the strategy pattern to create different variants of animations for how something moves, or how you might use a command pattern to give yourself a task manager that you could have. You could basically have a notice board that AI listens to and goes off and does things like an RPG game. Or there's loads of different things like that that would be nice to cover. And I guess the question is whether do they fit a long form video, or would they be better just to sort of riff on as an idea?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's hard to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, to do some like bonusly content, it gives us the opportunity to just, you know, have fun with it and not be too serious about, not way too worried about how does it look? Like, are we getting the, you know, when I make a video or even for the live streams, we have to make sure that we're providing the most value possible. Not that I want to provide less value on like a bonusly paid thing, but just it gives us a more opportunity to have fun with it and not be too concerned about all that. Oh my God, this guy Daniel, appreciate it, bro. Appreciate the love.
Yeah, I guess the kind of the boring technical explanation of what Charles was saying is that any content you put out there is there forever. It's basically evergreen. And so if we produce some piece of content, yeah, and like Charles has this already with the problem of having done the dots ECS stuff before, is that that's just not really very usable anymore. A lot of the old advice doesn't apply. And so there's sort of the kinds of content we've put out, we've sort of come to the conclusion we want this to be practical even if you come across it in 2 years' time.
100%.
As opposed to very explicitly. And this is also why I just don't like answering questions regarding things like, you know, how do I do this in XML, or how do I save this to JSON? Because right now my answer would be JSON.net. But for example, if you're doing a web API stuff, I would nowadays, because .NET Core 3 has a really good solution for it, I would say don't use that, use the native JSON solution. But my answers will change, and I don't like the idea of historically someone Googling some solution that's, from my perspective, out of date and irrelevant to what I would normally say now. So we're trying to carefully cover topics public facing that are more evergreen and more applicable as architectural and design decisions. And we don't really want to do too much of that sort of stuff that, like Charles was saying, we can just play around with an idea and sort of talk about how we'd solve certain problems now that we aren't worried will sort of poison the well of someone researching in 3-4 years' time, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely the standard we hold ourselves to. It's a personal decision. I'm not going to knock anyone who doesn't do that, but
I think we can all relate to the idea where you're looking for a solution to a problem. For example, when I hit that wall earlier, I mentioned where I was trying to do a property drawer with the new version. And I was like, visual element, what's that? Okay, I'm going to have to figure out how to use this. I typed in property drawers, Unity, 3D, even I wrote 2019, and I can't find any. Yeah. And every single resource is for the old way of doing things. And so historically, every single piece of advice that comes up now is actively not only not helping me, it's flooding the market for stuff that is trying to help me.
Yeah.
So obviously you can't rewind time and fix that, but the goal is at least to make sure that as much of the content out there still, you know, if you search it years down the line, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've been at it for an hour and a half. That's my cutoff. I have to start my day job now, unfortunately. So
actually, me too.
Yeah. So smash that like button one last time if you haven't already. Thank you all for joining us. I think I feel bad because we didn't really get to do a lot of code. I mean, we did review the code, I guess, but just didn't make a lot of changes. So I think I'll talk to Jason at some point today. You know, I'm letting you know this, Jason, now implicitly. How maybe we can do a free form, just hop on me and him on a chat, record it, drop it on Patreon, get into this code a little bit, maybe do a little doodling, if I may. You know, muck around with things that we probably shouldn't be mucking around with, but ultimately putting the code into a better place. So yeah, look out for that. And the next couple
and as a side note, Tron made the suggestion, invoke the like button, which is slightly better. I like that.
It's subtle. It's I like that. Invoke the like button. Don't use a coroutine though. Just invoke it directly. All right. Well, thanks guys. We'll be streaming next week. Still not sure what time and what day, but hey, keep an eye out for it. Keep an eye out for Sunday's video. It'll be 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm super excited about it. I'm really hamming it up, so I hope it doesn't bite me in the butt. All right. Catch you all later.